We're here at the first ever Swedish Citizens Assembly on climate. And I'm here with Sverker Jagers. You are one of the experts who have been tasked with informing the participants at this climate assembly. And you talked a lot about policy design and incentivizing behavior through policy. So I can imagine the climate assembly will have some ideas in this regard.
I hope so.
Yeah. What should they consider?
I think an important thing to consider is sort of recognizing that there are certain policy instruments that would help us very much in the transition, like using a price mechanism, for example, to let consumers pay the price that it costs to degrade the climate. At the same time, these kind of policy instruments are often not very highly regarded. It's difficult to get acceptance among the public for them. But what's important is to recognize that you can combine these policy instruments that we want to have with other policy instruments that can compensate for the reasons why people dislike the original ones, so to speak. So you can, for example, using the revenues from a carbon dioxide tax and invest that in other things that people appreciate. Lower the VAT on food, or even pay back the revenues from the tax back to the taxpayers. Because you want to price the cost that it means that is generated by degrading the climate, but not necessarily using those revenues as a fiscal revenue for the government. It's the steering effect that we are after.
So you had one point in that direction during your talk, which was that if the public perceives the measure to be fair, it's much more likely to be accepted.
Yes.
Do you have any gold standards in that regard internationally?
There is one good example. I should also say that what we see in our studies is that perceived fairness sort of helps generating acceptance, but in particular perceived unfairness generates resistance stronger than acceptance. Yes. Yeah. So how the tricky thing is how to avoid that policy instruments are perceived as so unfair that it generates resistance, loud resistance, like yellow vests. And a good example is from the Canadian carbon dioxide tax that was introduced in 2017, where President Trudeau decided that all the revenues from the carbon dioxide tax will be paid back to all households equally, sort of a flat dividend. And this design also made those groups in society that earn the least sort of incentives to support the tax, because even if they may not afford to have a car, they will still get revenues back from the national tax. And therefore, it was probably perceived both as fair that those who pollute should pay, but then also fair because it had some sort of compensating mechanism in it as well. And since 2017, they have managed to increase the tax twice, I think. So now it's basically at the same level as many European countries.
And is it effective?
Not in the short run, I think. It takes time with sort of transition society via the price mechanism. Takes time. But I mean, if we look at the Swedish case, where we have had such a tax for more than 30 years, it has been shown to have decreased the Swedish emissions by 30 to 40%. Yes, so in the longer run, yes, for sure.
Okay, so what playing field will the Citizens Assembly here in Sweden have to work with? Where are we on this in Sweden? You mentioned Sweden as a good example, but are we that far advanced in this, or do we have a lot of work to do still?
We have a lot of work to do, for sure. And it's both among consumers that we currently emit way too much carbon dioxide from transports, but also from food and from heating. And of course also the industrial side of Sweden. That part, I think, is pretty much regulated via the EU system with the ETS system, where it has been decided that there will be no more emission permits after 2039. But for consumers, it's more tricky. And for example, to have a complete transition of the vehicle fleet for consumers means that is to sort of leave fossil fuels for electricity. It requires a lot of challenges, as we know. I mean, both in terms of infrastructure for charging, but also to actually develop batteries that are sort of effective enough, and also to lower the price on those products. And also, I think, quite, if not dramatic, so at least quite significant changes in our food behaviors are needed, both in terms of having less food waste and also partly change our diet.
Okay, so looking at the global perspective, or intergovernmental, let's say, can you apply these measures, or what would your dream measure be on the global stage, like an international carbon tax or something of that sort?
I think that it's not that much research being done when it comes to sort of public acceptance in a global perspective. What we see is that there is a strong correlation between acceptance and level of political trust, and in prolongation, the degree to which countries suffer problems with corruption. So the more corrupt countries are, the less people want economic policy instruments at all. Okay. So unless you can sort of find a way to administer a carbon dioxide tax, not having to consult the government, unless you can do that, I think it's not very likely that we will see carbon dioxide taxes in the most corrupt countries in the world. Yeah. There people apparently seems to prefer more law and order regulations, punishing free riders rather than pricing bad behavior. Okay. And also, one really important thing one should keep in mind is that as long as we have large subsidies on fossil fuels, which is the case in many countries, most countries in the world, as long as you have those subsidies in place, taxes will have no effect. Yeah. They take out each other. Yeah. So actually one should start by removing subsidies before thinking about additional policy instruments. Right,
get your house in order, sort of.
Yeah.
So you had a Q&A with some of the members of the Citizens Assembly. Any particular topic that was raised that you want to share with us that you thought was, okay, this is heading in an interesting direction?
I think we had several really interesting discussions. I think the one that sort of was a bit, I was happy that it was brought up, was we talked about sort of the interplay between science and policy, and how is the dialogue between science and policy. And I think I concluded that there are quite few platforms where science and policy actually can meet and do meet, and where we as scientists get information about what do policymakers need to know in order to make better decisions. So I think that dialogue is really important. And then, of course, various thoughts about sort of fairness, unfairness perspectives linked to various policy instruments, and how you can mix different policies to sort of neutralize those factors that make people negative.
It's going to be very interesting to see what the Climate Assembly can achieve and what they will come up with in terms of propositions. We'll have to wait another 2 months.
To get new research questions coming out of this assembly, for sure.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you, Sverker.
Thank you.